A homeless man approaches Elon Musk and asks for $2 to help him, but the billionaire's reaction leaves everyone in shock. He was on a busy corner in San Francisco, his eyes fixed on a future that seemed increasingly distant. Lucas, a former software engineer, now lived on the streets, his life crumbled by an unrelenting economic crisis. The sign he held, reading, "I need $2 to change my life," was not just a plea for help. It was a cry of desperation and hope. He carried an old smartphone, a relic of his former life, which he repaired and charged in public libraries. On that device, a connection with a world that seemed to have forgotten him still pulsed, feeding a dream that refused to die. Meanwhile, young reporter Sophie in Los Angeles dreamed of making a leap in her career. Working for a small news portal, she was looking for a story that would put her on the map. Following Elon Musk on social media, she knew his posts always stirred up buzz, but nothing prepared her for what was to come. When Lucas decided to send a bold message on Twitter, asking for help directly from the tech magnate, she saw a brilliant opportunity. Musk's unexpected reply, "I'm curious, I'll meet you," ignited her ambition and motivated her to travel to San Francisco. The contrast between Lucas's life and Musk's fame was palpable. While Lucas struggled to survive, Musk traveled the country seeking to innovate the world. The meeting promised not only to change one man's life, but also to illuminate truths about inequality and solidarity in a society that often ignored those in greatest need. What would happen when these two worlds collided? The emotional and physical impact of this interaction could redefine Lucas's journey and inspire Sophie to follow her true purpose. What began as a simple request would transform into a story of overcoming, friendship, and transformation that would touch many hearts. Lucas sat in his usual corner, the sign in hand reflecting an almost desperate desire. The sun's heat beat down on his face, while the shadow of an imposing building seemed to symbolize everything he had lost. He was not just a former software engineer. He was a man who had watched his life disintegrate in a sea of debt and despair. Each day was a struggle for survival, and the uncertainty of what to eat or where to sleep had become his new normal. The old smartphone he carried had become his only connection to the outside world, but even that felt increasingly distant. The supportive messages he received from friends and family had dwindled, and loneliness was becoming a heavy burden to bear. That morning, as he watched the hurried passers-by, he felt a tightening in his chest. Most people passed by him without noticing his presence, immersed in their own problems. Among the hurried faces was a group of young people laughing and taking photos, oblivious to the lives unfolding in the shadows of their experiences. Lucas wondered if he would ever be able to laugh again. He remembered when the challenges were different, when the pressure of working on a significant tech project was his greatest stress. Now, his only responsibility was to find a place to sleep at night. Meanwhile, Sophie was in Los Angeles, immersed in her work, but struggling to find a story that truly mattered. The competitive environment and demands of her job pressured her to stand out. Her mind was filled with ideas, but none seemed impactful enough. When she saw Lucas's message to Musk, a spark of inspiration ignited within her. The idea of pursuing this story excited her, but also made her anxious. What would be going through the mind of someone in such a desolate situation? What if she failed to capture the depth of Lucas's struggle? Upon arriving in San Francisco, Sophie felt the weight of expectations. The meeting between Lucas and Musk was more than just an interview. It was an opportunity to tell a story that could change lives. But at the same time, she feared that her own ambition might overshadow the true essence of what was about to happen. When she finally met Lucas, the reality of his life became evident. He was not just a face among many. He had a name, a story, and a struggle that deserved to be heard. The first meeting was tense. Lucas was nervous, and Sophie felt the need to connect with him, but the words seemed scarce. He hesitated to share his story, fearing that his vulnerability would be misinterpreted. Lucas's insecurity manifested in small interactions, like when he looked at the ground while speaking or hesitated before answering questions. Sophie realized that for his story to be told, she would need to find a way to earn Lucas's trust. The contrast between their lives was evident, and Lucas struggled to understand what he expected by seeking help from Musk. He wondered if the intervention of someone so powerful could really make a difference in his life, or if it would merely be another form of exploitation of his pain. That doubt consumed him, making him skeptical about what might happen next. At the same time, he felt a flicker of hope ignite in his heart, even if hesitantly. Sophie, for her part, felt the weight of responsibility. The urgency to tell Lucas's story pressed her to act, but at the same time, she battled her own fear of failure. What would happen if the story was not received as she expected? And what if Lucas's life didn't change, despite all her efforts? These questions haunted her as she tried to find a way to connect authentically with the man who, by chance, could be the key to her success. As the days went by, Lucas's meeting with Musk became a tangible reality. But what once seemed like a magical solution also brought new challenges. The expectation that something grand would happen began to create an even greater emotional weight on Lucas's shoulders. The social pressure and the attention he was starting to receive could be both a blessing and a curse. He found himself struggling not only against his situation, but also against the expectations that began to form around him. Lucas and Sophie were on the brink of a transformation, but the road ahead was filled with uncertainties. They both needed to confront their fears and limits, challenging their beliefs about themselves and the world around them. The journey unfolding before them promised to be an emotional roller coaster, full of ups and downs, but also opportunities for growth and connection. Lucas felt the weight of the days accumulating on his shoulders, and the growing expectation regarding the meeting with Musk only increased his anxiety. The curious stares from strangers now directed at him were a constant reminder of his vulnerability. What had once been a safe space of anonymity had turned into an arena of judgment. He wondered if he was ready for what was to come. The pressure to present himself as an example of overcoming adversity, someone who could inspire, weighed like an anchor on his heart. Meanwhile, Sophie was determined to make the most of the opportunity she had in hand. However, the deeper she delved into Lucas's life, the more divided she felt. The reality of his struggle was complex and full of nuances that she feared she could not capture. One night, after a particularly tough conversation with Lucas about his frustrations and fears, she felt something within her also crumbling. The desire to tell his story mixed with the fear of not doing justice to his pain. She began to question her own motivation. Was she there for Lucas or for her own ambition? What should have been an empowering project started to turn into an emotional battleground. Their conversations became more intense, and Lucas began to open his heart, sharing not only his struggles, but also memories of joyful moments that seemed so distant. However, with each story told, a new layer of pain was revealed, and Lucas found himself struggling not to be consumed by these feelings. One day, while walking through the streets, Lucas came across an old college friend. The reunion left him shaken. The friend, now surrounded by success, seemed to be everything Lucas had dreamed of being, a fulfilled man, full of achievements. The conversation was brief, but the words of encouragement were overshadowed by the comparison Lucas made between their lives. He felt even more powerless, as if he were being dragged into an abyss where hope was just an illusion. This encounter marked a turning point for Lucas. Insecurity and doubt intensified, and he began to question whether he truly deserved the help he was seeking. This internal crisis led him to pull away from Sophie, fearing that his vulnerability might be a weakness she could not understand. The silence between them grew, and Sophie, noticing the change, felt powerless to break the barrier that was forming. The pressure to present himself to Musk intensified, and Lucas, increasingly isolated, began to lose himself in his thoughts. He wondered if the help he was waiting for was truly an escape or just a way to stage his pain for an audience that did not care. This uncertainty manifested in sleepless nights, anxiety attacks that left him paralyzed, and a constant struggle against the feeling that he was in an endless cycle of failure. Sophie, for her part, found herself in a dilemma. As she tried to understand the new dynamic between them, she realized she needed a different approach. She decided to seek the help of a mentor in her writing, someone who could guide her in finding the essence of the story she wanted to tell. Conversations with this mentor helped her see the situation in a new light and made her reflect on the role she was playing in Lucas's life. It was time to change the approach and focus more on his emotions and less on the results she hoped to achieve. Meanwhile, the date of the meeting with Musk approached, and the atmosphere of expectation became almost unbearable. Lucas was on the brink of a breakdown, struggling with the idea that his life could be turned into a spectacle. The external and internal pressure intensified, and the line between hope and despair became increasingly thin. He found himself in a limbo, a place where transformation seemed possible, but doubt and fear prevented him from taking the next step. The journey was far from simple, and Lucas and Sophie realized that they would need to confront not only their fears, but also the expectations that the world had placed upon them. They were both on the verge of a significant change, but the path was filled with challenges, requiring courage and resilience to move forward. The lessons learned thus far would be tested, and the true essence of what it meant to fight for a new life would reveal itself in the upcoming stages of this complex journey. Lucas was in a state of growing despair when an unexpected event drastically changed the course of his trajectory. On an ordinary day, while walking through the city streets, he received a phone call that seemed to come from a distant world. It was the era of an old professor, someone who had been an inspiring figure in Lucas's academic life. Upon learning of Lucas's meeting with Musk, the professor offered him a chance to speak at an event about overcoming challenges and innovation. The proposal was simple: share his story, his struggles, and what he had learned along the way. This invitation brought a mix of emotions. Lucas felt an initial wave of relief and excitement, but soon he was engulfed by doubt. He knew this was a rare opportunity, a chance to connect with people who could understand the depth of his journey. However, the idea of exposing himself in that way terrified him. He began to question whether he truly had anything valuable to offer, whether his story was worthy of being heard. The pressure that had previously been solely related to his meeting with Musk now expanded, focusing on his ability to present himself as an example of overcoming adversity on stage. The following hours were marked by a whirlwind of thoughts. Lucas found himself trapped in a cycle of reflection, reliving his memories, both joyful and painful. He recalled the nights he had battled loneliness, the moments when hope felt like a distant mirage. The weight of his vulnerability became almost unbearable, and the idea of exposing himself to an audience brought him to the brink of collapse. What should have been a moment of transformation was turning into an emotional battlefield. Meanwhile, Sophie, noticing the change in Lucas's behavior, decided she needed to act. She remembered her conversations with the mentor and how those interactions had helped her see the situation from a new perspective. It was time to focus on Lucas, not as a project to be shaped, but as a friend in need of support. It was then that she decided to visit him, determined to break the barrier that had formed between them. When Sophie arrived, she found Lucas in a state of deep distress. After several attempts to connect, he finally opened up, sharing his fears and insecurities about the professor's invitation. The words came out in an uncontrolled flow, and Sophie listened attentively without interrupting. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, where Lucas allowed his weaknesses to be seen. The conversation transformed into a moment of clarity. Lucas realized that what truly mattered was not Musk's approval or the validation of his story, but the authenticity of his experience. He began to understand that his journey, with all its failures and triumphs, had value. The external pressure started to dissipate as he focused on his truth. This encounter not only strengthened the connection between Lucas and Sophie, but also ignited a new flame of determination within him. He decided to accept the professor's invitation, not as a spectacle, but as an opportunity to share his true self. From that point on, Lucas began to shape his narrative in a way that reflected his authenticity rather than the expectations of others. With this new perspective, new possibilities began to emerge. Lucas saw the chance to transform his pain into inspiration, not just for himself, but for others who were fighting similar battles. The meeting with Musk still lay ahead, but now he felt more prepared to face it, not as a perfect example of overcoming adversity, but as someone who was in constant evolution. The anticipation became a source of motivation, and Lucas was ready to embrace the journey that awaited him. Lucas was about to take the stage, his heart racing and his mind in turmoil. The auditorium was filled with people, all eagerly waiting to hear him speak. The professor's invitation echoed in his mind. He knew he had a responsibility. It was time to confront his greatest fear, exposing his vulnerability before an unknown audience. As he waited for his turn to speak, he felt the pressure bearing down on him. The room echoed with murmurs, and he sensed all eyes were fixed on him, expecting him to be perfect, for his story to be inspiring, for him to embody overcoming challenges. However, the truth was, he was still struggling to feel comfortable with himself. Doubt, insecurity, and fear of not being enough flooded his mind. When he was finally called to the stage, Lucas took a deep breath. He remembered the conversation with Sophie and how she had helped him see his worth. He didn't need to be a perfect example of success. His story was about the journey, the struggle, and most importantly, the acceptance of his weaknesses. As he faced the audience, he felt a wave of empathy and understanding, as if each person there had their own internal battles. However, as soon as he began to speak, his voice faltered. A wave of panic washed over him, and he hesitated. The room fell silent. Lucas found himself in an internal conflict. Should he give up and walk away, or should he confront his fear and continue? He then remembered the nights he had fought against loneliness, and how vulnerability had ultimately been his greatest ally. With that memory, he decided he would not give in. He began to share his story in a raw and honest way. He spoke about moments of pain, the loneliness that had accompanied him, and the times he thought he would never be able to rise again. But he also talked about the importance of friendship, the support he received from Sophie, and how that helped him find a new purpose. Each word he spoke seemed to cut through the tense atmosphere of the auditorium, creating a genuine connection between him and the audience. As he delved deeper into his narrative, Lucas realized that his insecurities were dissipating. He was no longer just talking about himself. He was touching the lives of others who were struggling with their own difficulties. He saw tears in the eyes of some listeners and smiles of understanding in others. This encouraged him to continue, and with each sentence, he felt a wave of liberation and acceptance. When he finished his speech, a reverent silence filled the room. Lucas was breathless, but there was a shine in his eyes that hadn't existed before. He had faced his greatest challenge, not just the fear of exposing himself, but the fear of not being accepted for his true essence. The audience then erupted in applause. He hadn't expected this reaction. It was a validation of his authenticity, and something within him transformed. The emotional impact of that moment was profound. Lucas not only overcame a personal obstacle, but also inspired others to embrace their own stories. He saw Sophie in the audience with a proud smile, and he knew that her friendship had been a fundamental pillar in his journey. What began as a moment of despair transformed into a milestone of overcoming. Lucas realized that true strength lies in vulnerability and in the ability to touch the hearts of others. Thus, he left the stage not just as a speaker, but as an example that everyone has a story worth telling. More importantly, he understood that true overcoming is not about having no flaws, but about how one gets up after each fall. After stepping off the stage, Lucas felt a mix of relief and euphoria. The experience of sharing his vulnerability transformed not only his perception of himself, but also the impact he had on others. The messages of support and gratitude he received after the speech were a testament that his story had resonated deeply. He realized that the courage to expose himself had created a safe space for others to share their own struggles. Reflecting on the journey that brought him here, Lucas understood that every step, every moment of insecurity had been essential for his growth. He recognized that he didn't need to be perfect to be valuable. Authenticity and sincerity were his greatest strengths. In a later conversation with Sophie, he expressed how her friendship had been a beacon in his darkest moments. Sophie, in turn, revealed that Lucas's speech had inspired her to confront her own insecurities. Together, they committed to supporting each other in their new personal journeys. Lucas's classmates, who once seemed like just anonymous faces in the audience, became part of a community. Many approached him after his presentation to share their own stories, creating bonds of empathy and solidarity. He realized that by opening up, he had created an environment where others felt safe to do the same. That connection was a powerful reminder that everyone faces invisible battles. Over time, Lucas began to get involved in emotional support initiatives at school, seeking to help others feel less alone in their struggles. He became an advocate for vulnerability as strength, promoting open conversations about mental health and acceptance. Every time he saw someone open up, he felt that his own journey became more meaningful. The audience that had once intimidated him was now an extension of his new family. Lucas understood that the true new beginning was not just in his life, but in the lives he touched by opening up. He had found his purpose, to help others feel seen and heard. The vulnerability that once imprisoned him now set him free, and he was ready to embrace this new phase with courage and determination.